Hello and welcome to Home Media Minefield presents Let's See What's Out There. Also, an entertainment video stream and podcast focused on film and television entertainment as well as related media. This episode, I am joined by Paul from The Comic Crush, and this is going out as a collaboration with part of his Panels to Pictures series. So welcome, Paul Dunn. How you doing?
Hey Keith, how are you?
Yeah, very good. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to be on the other side of this for a change.
Well, yes, last time we were together, we did talk about...
We did Bond, which you can check out on both channels, on Home Media Minefield and on the Comic Crush YouTube channel. That video is doing quite well. I'm really pleased with the number of people that have turned up and watched that, and thank you very much for everyone for joining us, because that was quite a long one.
It was.
We probably won't go as long this time. Hopefully we'll get this done in about an hour.
Yeah, I was going to say we could. This is a subject that we could go on for weeks about, but we promised to try and keep it concise. So this is essentially following up a video that went out last week on Paul's channel, The Comic Crush, as part of his Panels to Pictures series, which is looking at movies. And last week, Paul discussed the film adaptation of Dune, or Dune, depending on where you are and how you like to pronounce it. But so we're going to have another discussion around that same huge topic.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what I want to get, Keith, is the first part is called Caladan, which is on my channel right now, and it'll also be on this channel by the time you watch this, I hope. And that was to get kind of Tony's opinion, because Tony is a sort of Dune super fan almost. He has read the book, he's watched the sci-fi TV shows, he's watched the Lynch version, he's watched the film that we're going to talk about 4 times. So that was really kind of coming at it from an expert opinion. I don't know your background, Keith. Have you read the book?
My background, Dune on Home Media. No, my background is, I've got to be perfectly honest, I have never actually read Frank Herbert's novel.
Me neither.
I find, at the best of times, trying to get into sort of a 600+ page, really dense novel like that wasn't something I did as a kid. And my sort of history with it, I haven't watched any of the mini series that the Sci-Fi Channel did, because obviously this has been adapted for film and television, this property. I did, when I was young, I did see the Lynch film, and it, at the time I didn't really appreciate it. I was, it came out the year after Return of the Jedi. Yeah,
right.
And my sci-fi, I was a sci-fi fan, but it was very much the sort of space opera, action adventure sci-fi. Obviously Star Wars and Flash Gordon and all of that kind of thing. And I kind of struggled with the with appreciating the Lynch film at the time. I don't even know whether the one I saw was the theatrical version or whether it was the one that Lynch removed his name from.
So I think for a long time, given the time you would have seen it, you would have only seen the theatrical version. I think the TV version didn't surface until, I've got a feeling it's something like the late 90s or the early 2000s.
Right.
And as far as I know, that was released on DVD. It doesn't factor into the new Arrow release, sadly. It's still only available on DVD. But it's worth checking out. Although it is quite ponderous in places.
Right. Yeah. And I know there's also some sort of super fan edition where they went and, on the additional scenes, they made the eyes blue, of the so the people have gone out of my head completely, but yes, they went back and made the eyes blue for those characters, and cleaned it up and whatever. But no, I'm not aware of having seen that. So really, I've kind of dived back into the whole franchise because in anticipation and because of the launch of the new film. So I got the 4K Arrow home media release, which so far I've only done an unboxing of because I haven't gone through all of the bonus materials, etc. yet to do a full review. But I did watch the film before watching the new film, and I'm not going to lie, I found it hard work. I found it to be difficult to follow. I found the visual effects in it to be, in terms of the optical and the compositing and the space, outer space effects, I found them to have not aged well. Bearing in mind that this is a film, as I've already said, that came out post Return of the Jedi. So, although I will say that the design work on this and the costumes and a lot of the other visuals on this are incredibly good, and I really do appreciate. I know there's some Carlos Rambaldi design work in here, and Kit West did some of the special effects and all of this sort of thing, and I really appreciate that. And going back to your question, what was my sort of entry point? I mean, I was aware of Dune mainly because of magazines that I read when I was a kid. I would read things like Starburst and Starlog and all of that sort of thing. And often, there were films reviewed in those that I wasn't even old enough to see, at the time. But I remember a lot of Dune imagery being in those books, and very impressed with the sort of artwork and production design and whatever. But not so impressed with the film. And I did. Even watching it this time, I did find it was kind of, confusing in places. Those inner monologues, I really don't think worked. I can understand why they did those, but it did feel rushed towards the end. Sting, he may have looked great, but his acting was bad. And Lynch. I mean, you have to remember at the time, he was only famous for having done Eraserhead and The Elephant Man. It wasn't the sort of David Lynch we know today. This was prior to him doing many of his great films. But there was always this thing about how he had a lack of interest in the source material himself, and I do think sometimes I can see the criticism there about how the film doesn't particularly gel well together.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder sometimes about the kind of politics of taking a movie. I mean, I think it's fine for people to take a movie for money. That's absolutely cool. Or just because they need work, or just because they're aware that it will elevate their sort of standing in the industry. There's been plenty of good movies made from those sorts of arrangements. However, I do wonder why you would pick something so massively complex for that. And, and I think... I don't know if it was anything to do with Blue Velvet, because I think De Laurentiis also made Blue Velvet.
That was
Blue Velvet. Yeah, but I wonder if it was one of those, I'll do this, but you've got to let me do that, on a smaller scale, because Blue Velvet won't have been expensive. And I'm not being like, that's just the economics of it. It won't have been expensive. And I wonder if it was a matter of, Dino needed Dino, like I know him, I don't know him, but Dino needed a director fast. And it was just a matter of, you come and do this, and I'll give you the money for that. You come and do this 23 million thing, and I'll give you the 11 million or 4 million you need to go and make something as challenging as Blue Velvet. I think there's a lot of charm in the Lynch version. I don't like all those interior monologues. I think that's bad filmmaking.
Yeah.
I understand a lot of that comes from the book, though. We know that Ridley Scott was going to make this at one stage, but unfortunately, I think his brother passed away, and he kind of went into a bit of a funk, and from that, you got Blade Runner.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there was a couple of failed attempts before.
Well, the Jodorowsky version, which is
yeah, you had Arthur P. Jacobs of Planet of the Apes had the rights, and then you were going to get the Alejandro Jodorowsky version, which was going to,
I think
Jodorowsky, Salvador Dali, and whatever involved in it, and was going to be huge. I
think Jodorowsky was just sniffing Salvador Dali's paint fumes, though. Quite frankly, like, I don't know if you've ever seen that documentary, but I as interesting and fascinating as it is, I think he's talking absolute bollocks. Like,
okay. I haven't actually seen the documentary.
You should watch it. I've got it. I
was hoping it would be included with this, but sadly not.
We'll take a day, and I'll come to you, or you can come to me, and we'll sit and watch it. It's brilliant. But it's also like I think he is just talking absolute balls. Lynch is a madman to a certain degree.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and also obviously, as you rightly said, Dino De Laurentiis, teamed up with Ridley Scott at one point as well. Obviously, yes, Ridley had that tragedy in his family and left the project for that. But also there was a lot of my understanding, and I only get this from, I have listened to part of the commentary by Paul M. Salmon, who is he worked on Dune, but he's very well known for having written the book about the making of Blade Runner. So
and he's something of a RoboCop expert. He's very involved in sort of behind the scenes stuff on film, and in fact, he's worked on, as you point out, on quite a few films. Sorry, please continue.
Well, no, I don't want to misquote him here, but I watched your part one, and you asked, is it Tony, your guest on part one? Yeah, you asked Tony, who's obviously very familiar with the book, and you mentioned about some sort of implied incest. There
was a strange moment in the film. I don't know if you remember it, where they're in the desert and they have to change into the still suits, and they kind of each sort of steal a glance at each other as they're getting dressed. And I wonder if that was in the book. Was that Villeneuve's way of having that but dismissing it, so you don't have to deal with it? Because obviously it's not a comfortable subject in a $250 million blockbuster.
No, not at all. No, it's definitely not a comfortable subject. I don't know whether it was in the book, but my understanding, and as I said, this is just sort of third-hand understanding from things I've read and listened to, is that the script that Ridley Scott was working on, which I think was done by Rudy Wurlitzer, I think, that may have had hints of that within that version of the script, which was one of the reasons that the studio was hesitant to go ahead with the funding.
Got it. Thank you for clearing that up.
But that's only, as I said, what I've got through reading and listening to a commentary, etc.
I really appreciate you clearing that up, Keith, because I just couldn't remember where I'd read that. Thank you.
No, that's all right. I just hope it's correct.
So I mean, the Lynch version, not great, but still ambitious. I love the sandworms. I mean, just talking about getting down to single moments. I love the sandworms in that version. I thought they were great. There are certain things about it I like. I think it has some fascinating ideas. The Guild Navigator was, of course, so, as Tony was talking about, it's so memorable. The great big amorphous blob with arms in the in the tank.
Yeah.
And there's some, the fantastic ideas, like the communications devices that translate. There's some wonderful stuff in it.
There is, as I said, the there's definitely some Lynch elements in this for sure. Because some of the film is quite grotesque. But also, even though some of the visual effects, as I said, don't really hold up, I'm talking more about the sort of composite type effects. Things like the design, the costume design, the sandworms, all of that sort of stuff really works, and it is quite an ornate vision of this material, I think, compared to Villeneuve's, which we'll get onto. But
I think in a lot of ways Villeneuve's is quite austere in comparison.
Yes.
But still,
Yeah.
Shoulders.
I mean, the other thing that, of course, and this is widely known, the Lynch film suffers from the fact that the agreement that Dino De Laurentiis and the studio and whatever had was the film could not be more than 2 hours and 18 minutes or whatever it turned out being. Well, when you put that into comparison, that's trying to cram this entire novel, the entire first novel of Dune into that time frame, whereas compared to Villeneuve's film, which was longer than that, it was about 2 hours 35 minutes, but obviously it's only trying to do half of that novel in that time. So again, this felt bloated and rushed, and as a result, narratively was quite confusing. They had to use those inner monologues, which, as you rightly said, they were taken from, I believe, parenthesis dialogue within the novel itself. So it was taken, it was adapted straight from the source material there. But it was obviously crammed in to try and fill in those gaps that deleted scenes would have dealt with.
The thing that annoys me is if you look at the caliber of actors in the Lynch film.
Yeah.
I'm really shocked. I mean, maybe they did. I don't know the ins and outs of the making of that film. But I'm really shocked that not one of them, because they were quite, hefty actors, in terms of the weight of them. I'm surprised that not one of them said to Lynch, "Look, I can do this with a look. I can do this with." The way I ask a question, or I'm a professionally trained actor.
Exactly. No, I get it. I mean, but by the way, I have to credit. I didn't have time. Normally, I try and prepare slides for these things, even though it goes out as obviously an audio podcast as well. But to try and help, I have to credit the website BuzzFeed here, because this is the best that I've found, sort of doing the, if you want, the sort of comparison of the actors playing the various characters. And obviously there we've got, of course, Kyle MacLachlan from the Lynch film, which of course was the beginning of a huge relationship between director and actor there, working relationship in terms of, obviously Kyle MacLachlan's appeared in numerous Lynch films, including, the series Twin Peaks, etc.
He's a fascinating actor. Like that guy is an excellent actor. Yeah. And I think he's one of those actors that fulfills that adage of, and Tony and I were talking about this, the different schools of acting where, Gabriel Byrne said there's a couple of schools of acting. One is that you put on fake noses and you become someone else. And the other is that you play yourself, and the better you can play yourself, the better actor you are. And I kind of get the feeling that Kyle MacLachlan has spent his entire life playing himself at different stages of his life, and he's well aware of who he is and his kind of proclivities and sensitivities as an actor. Yes. And that makes him an excellent actor, although you never see him really transform.
Yes.
You do always get a sense of, in a way, it's like looking at The Rock, because you never believe The Rock is who he says he is. You just go, oh, And we were talking about The Rock on the Sony version as well. That's The Rock playing, you know, it's never, oh, that's Luke Hobbs or that's whoever. Like, that's The Rock, because there's no mistake in it. And in a way, you never go. You know,
both work. You know, sometimes you're playing
totally
personal charisma.
You're the actor, you know better than I do.
And sometimes it's, but I mean, I know a lot of purists of the Dune novel. Obviously, a lot had a problem at the time with Kyle MacLachlan being slightly older than the character of Paul Atreides. You know, because he was kind of in his mid-20s at this point, and it was always supposed to be a teenage character. And obviously, Timothée Chalamet is not a teenager, but obviously looks very young for his age, right?
He looks like Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah, well, in that picture he does for sure. Yes, I mean, I think he, you know, both actors brought something to the role there.
Absolutely.
And of course, you had Jürgen Prochnow, however you pronounce that.
Prochnow.
Yeah, who was massive in the 80s. You know, fine.
Very good actor. Very good actor.
And he's been obviously replaced by Oscar Isaac in the new film. Both actors, I think, you know, they make the character their own, but both of them deliver solid performances in the, you know, respective materials there. But yeah, this is quite a nice sort of way of showing the characters then and you know, the actors who are playing them both then and now. But I don't know whether we want to go through each one individually, but you know, most of them had a counterpart in this film. There were one or two characters that we haven't got to yet, that, you know, from the source material that haven't yet appeared in the new adaptation. Here's one of the probably the biggest changes. So, you know, Max von Sydow was replaced by Sharon Duncan Brewster, but hey, both work, you know. Both tell the story. But of course, that, you know, there are some we haven't got to yet. The main one being the character that Sting played in the 1984 film.
And he's sort of like a Harkonnen assassin, am I right?
Yeah, that's right. And
because obviously that's the other thing everyone remembers from Dune is Sting and his black leather underpants, his wire fronts.
Well, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens in part 2, right? But yeah, like, it's an interesting film. I think it's a good example of what happens when you try and do a Dino De Laurentiis, a George Lucas film on a Dino De Laurentiis budget.
That's a very good way of putting it, actually. Yes.
So it's, you know, it's one of those things. What can you say? What can you say? I'll certainly tune in and watch it at some point. I do need to kind of give it a look again. I just haven't had the time or wherewithal to kind of really dig into that version. But I'm looking forward to it. Like you, I've got the Arrow box set. So I'll certainly be taking a look at everything that offers. Keith, I want to try and get an idea of how you feel about the new version, because we saw this, and thank you, by the way. We saw this because you managed to get us some really great tickets for a special BAFTA screening of it. And thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. I was really glad to be able to see it. As much as I am kind of railing against the cinema experience a lot lately, largely because I don't think it's adjusting itself well for the way the audience is taking in its art. That is to say, these films should be available on streaming because people don't want to go out at the moment. Well, it's not that people don't want to go out. There are a lot of people out there. But I think there's room for both. However, I was really thrilled to see it on a huge IMAX screen, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you. We had really great seats, and it was just a wonderful experience. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, you're very welcome. I mean, I have actually seen it again since then.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I saw it over. I went to another BAFTA screening, but over at Warner's own screening rooms, which obviously they're kitted out. It's got fantastic sound, like Dolby Atmos, etc. But obviously it wasn't in IMAX watching it at Warner. It was just all 235:1 aspect ratio. Now I have to say that I'm so glad my first viewing of it was in IMAX, because Denis Villeneuve has used that format in a very, very creative way. The dream sequences that Paul has, as well as a lot of the establishing shots of different worlds, etc., and many of the action sequences were all actually shot in IMAX using IMAX cameras, and look absolutely stunning on an IMAX screen, even though we're dealing with shifting aspect ratios and whatever. And I just thought it kind of, because of that, it punched. I thought he used it in a narratively sound way, in the fact that maybe he wasn't able to afford to do or it wasn't practical to shoot the entire movie in IMAX, but the scenes that they did do it with were chosen very wisely, I think. And I think certainly at the beginning of the film, because we experience a lot of the film in dream sequence from Paul's point of view, having that immerse us in that IMAX ratio really kind of brought you into what he was experiencing. At least I thought so. I don't know whether I'm sounding sort of wanky and pretentious here. But
no, totally. I completely agree. I think IMAX is one of those things that could be, I mean, it's not worth directors just trying to use it as a fad, because it's expensive, and it's time consuming, which means it's expensive, because IMAX only takes 3-minute loads, and it takes a few seconds, as from, I'm sure you've shot on film, right?
Yeah.
And you've either directed
not IMAX,
or been in, no, yeah. But when you've directed or you've been in movies, you must have shot film. And it takes a few seconds for the film and sound to get up to speed. So you've already lost, a few seconds there. And then you've got to shoot your sequence as quickly as possible. Then you've got to get another load in the camera, because, why would you want to waste any of that at 3 minutes a load, I think that more filmmakers will start using IMAX.
Yes.
As they come up with better digital versions of IMAX. I don't go for this LIMAX thing. I think that's absolute nonsense, because we don't call it Li 35mm, do we? So I think that needs to go away. That's guff, and that is the old way of thinking. I think if you're a filmmaker that prefers 35mm or IMAX film, then use it. If you're a filmmaker that prefers digital footage, then use it. I think all that matters is the execution and the piece of art you create, not necessarily how you create it. So I go off on this. It really annoys me now. Like I had a bit of an epiphany on it like a couple of years back, and it's just like, this is nonsense. If we're watching digital projection on a film that's shot digital camera, you don't go, oh, it's like 35mm. It's not real 35. It's like, who cares? Who freaking cares at this point? But I think as they get into faster digital loads, better digital acquisition, bigger chips, because obviously it's a big frame to kind of store digitally.
Oh yeah.
And the chip size does make a difference, and better kind of dynamic range. I think more filmmakers should and will use it. Yeah. And even Wally Pfister a few years ago in a documentary, who shot a lot of Nolan's early movies, including Dark Knight, said that, look, we will be using digital eventually. Like Chris and I will go to digital eventually. It's just a matter of time, but it has to be good enough, and it has to be, So I'm really glad we saw it in IMAX. It was a beautiful frame, a beautiful kind of scope, and the immersion of it was gorgeous.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the film as a story? I mean, did you enjoy it? I mean, that's the key thing. Yeah. Enjoyment.
Yeah,
did you enjoy
I
it?
absolutely did. It's funny, actually. I know some people who didn't. I've had conversations with people that thought it was, drawn out and slow and boring and a bit up its own arse and pretentious. And, I've heard all sorts of things like that. I did not. That was not my experience at all. My experience with this, going in, I knew it was going to be a long film. We know what the running time was. However, I thought that the world building in this, even though, as you said, it was more austere than what Lynch had done, maybe, I thought the world building was absolutely fantastic, and I got really drawn into it. I think a lot of it helped in the
excuse me,
in the fact that Villeneuve, and again, I know he's been criticized for this, but he decided to do as much as he could practically. Okay, yes, of course, there were digital elements and CG elements and bits and pieces included in this, but wherever possible, he would film on location. Lots of the desert stuff was filmed in the deserts in Jordan. He would have sets built for most of the interiors, and even down to the copters that they used in this with that sort of dragonfly insect-like thing, which, by the way, he did that so much better than the Lynch film did. But they were practically made on gimbals, and it was just the actual wings themselves that had been generated in post. And I think it's funny, but there's something tangible about that you feel when you're watching this. I can't describe it. I know there are tools that you can use that prevent you, that you don't have to go to those extremes, and not every film has the budget to go to those extremes. I for one really appreciate that. Of course, what he did throughout the entire film was he desaturated everything, so that when we are on Arrakis, the desert world, instead of it looking, having blue skies and golden sands, he took that out so that the sand, it looked like sand, but the sky was very it was kind of like a beige color.
It's very washed out, and it's a great look. I think with filmmaking, I mean, looking at it now, I hope more people will move to, because films are expensive, and I think that actually prohibits what gets made. Whereas now I'm looking at things like the Unreal Engine, that they used for The Mandalorian. And it's just I don't know about you, but I couldn't tell that none of that was real in The Mandalorian.
No, well, I think, I mean, this is, we could go off on a massive
location. I just want to,
but I'll just say, to sum that up briefly, in my opinion, is the stagecraft that they use in the volume, that technology you just mentioned in The Mandalorian, that to me is the perfect compromise, because that is that gives you the flexibility that shooting on a blue or green screen soundstage gives a filmmaker in terms of creating a world and doing things in post. But likewise, it gives the tangibility for the actor and the crew to see and to film against. So it's almost like a nice happy medium between the extreme of Villeneuve and his crew going out to the Jordan desert to try and film scenes like that, which is obviously a logistical and complex nightmare in itself, right? So it gives you that control of a studio, but rather than just being in a lime green room with a few X's dotted around, you are actually seeing the environment. And I just think I do think that moving forward, that technology, which is kind of largely Lucasfilm at the moment, will indeed be adopted by
I think all the big guys need to be using it, and moving forward that, because
it's a great tool. A great tool. I mean, it's expensive. It is expensive. It's funny. It has different costs. There are the costs to doing things practically, which is hard. But then there are also the costs to doing things digitally, and in that sense, and you've got one can argue you've got slightly more control, but then again, it's harder to make things look real. But
also I imagine on
happy medium.
Sorry. Go on. Sorry, Keith. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I do apologize.
I think that I've said enough on that, because we can really go off on a tangent. Otherwise.
But I just mean in terms of not having to negotiate with governments over how long you can shoot for and where you can shoot, and
sure.
It's just like, sorry, mate. Give me the digital acquisition every time. I mean, it's a handsome looking film. I don't want to say too much on that version, because I did say a lot in the other version with Tony. I'm kind of more interested in your thoughts.
Absolutely. My thoughts are, as you said, the movie looks fantastic. The world building was really impressive. The cast, which I'll bring them up again. A great cast here. I didn't think there was a duff performance among any of them. I
think Rebecca Ferguson was amazing.
Yeah, we've got her there as Lady Jessica. Obviously, she was played by Francesca Annis in the 1984 version, who, again, did a good job. But I think the Ferguson's performance was much more nuanced. To be fair, she was given some better material, I think, to work with as well than the script for the 84 version. But yes, her performance, fantastic. I bought into the worlds and the characters, and it wasn't that I'd seen it, a couple of days after seeing the 84 version. If I hadn't seen the 84 version, if I was a new audience member completely, I think I would have bought into this world, and I just like, and obviously, of course, because this is made, decades later, we do have the technology to actually envisage and imagine it much better as well. Like, for example, we're looking at the character of Gurney, which is played by Patrick Stewart in the original version, and Josh Brolin in this. But early on in the film, when he and Paul have a fake duel, fake combat duel, they use those energy shields, and they really don't look good in the Lynch version.
No, they don't look great. I think they have a very unique look, which is interesting.
True.
And I really like it because it's interesting, because it's different.
Yeah.
Jason
Momoa gets lots more to do as Duncan Idaho in this version than Richard Jordan did in the original. And again, you talk about people who sort of bring their own charisma to a performance. Jason Momoa is definitely one of those actors that does that, and I think the audience connect with this character and connect with the friendship that he and Paul have very well in this adaptation in Villeneuve's film. I think that the sort of camaraderie and banter between the characters really works in this. How he kind of gives him a bit of a ribbing about, have you put on some muscle there? And he's, well, really? No. And all that. I loved all of that stuff.
It's nice.
And then, of course, we've got Sean Young played Chani in the original, and which is, of course, played by Zendaya in this version. And I think the choice to use Chani as the the visions that Paul was getting is kind of the narrative introduction into the worlds was a better choice, actually, than they did in the other adaptation. I don't know about you, but I thought, obviously we don't get a lot of Zendaya actually in this film. She's going to have a much bigger part in part 2. I kind of again bought into all of that stuff. I thought that worked rather well.
David Dasmalchian. I think I'm probably mispronouncing his name. He also writes comics. He's a terrific actor. I remember him first from Dark Knight, where he was great. I remember reading about him and seeing this, like in this article, he talked about, I can't remember if it was I imagine it was for Ant-Man, but it might have even been Dark Knight. But he had got down to the point where he was broke, like absolutely flat broke, and he was really worried about his family and what he was going to do. And he said we'd gotten down to $400 between us all, in the bank. Like literally, that's what we had. And on that day, he got a phone call from Marvel saying, "Oh, you've just got Ant-Man," and it was just like,
No, I'm happy for him. I mean, again, he was great in the Suicide Squad as well earlier this year.
He's a terrific actor, and again, he's a very odd actor. He can inhabit sort of very strange spaces as an actor, and as he does in this.
Well, it's funny actually because I think this is one of those characters that I think you've got two very different choices between what he does and what Brad Dourif does in the 84 version, but they actually both work in different ways.
Absolutely.
And they both suit the type of film that they're in. So, but yes, he was great. I agree.
Now, this is like Stellan Skarsgård. I didn't think you could make a more disgusting version of Harkonnen than you had with Kenneth Macmillan, but bloody hell, is he gross? And the thing is, he's gross of action as well as form. I think what he does to Dr. Yui is horrible.
I agree. It's a much less, he was kind of, I think he said it in an interview, he was kind of channeling sort of Marlon Brando's Colonel Kurtz in his performance.
Well, he's a bit more like Marlon Brando's Dr. Moreau, really. But
there you go. Actually, that's quite good. Yes, obviously Kenneth Macmillan played it very differently, equally as gross, but just in a much more flamboyant way in Lynch's film. But I personally, I preferred Skarsgård's take on it.
Fair enough. And this actor, Stephen McKinley Henderson, I love seeing him pop up in movies. He's a terrific presence. He's like this big bear of a guy. But he's got this really sonorous voice, and I just really like him. I mean, Freddie Jones is a very odd actor as well. I think he's got this sort of nervousness about him, and I love watching actors because I mean, you get some great things coming out there that you wouldn't necessarily think about in life, but obviously they do. Still go. I mean, I could have done to see more Javier Bardem in the film. I really love his acting. Sean Phillips and Charlotte Rampling. I mean, Charlotte Rampling. It's always great to see Charlotte Rampling in films.
She was fantastic. I mean, that scene with the hand in the box scene, I thought was. I really liked the way that Villeneuve did it compared to the Lynch one. I have to say, I thought that worked really nicely in this film. But yeah, and then that we've already talked briefly about this, but Sharon Duncan Brewster worked really well. She had I
think with her, you really buy the fact that both things can be true. Like she can be loyal to the Fremen and loyal to the Emperor and help the Atreides. Like, or not both things, but all three things. And you can really buy with her. She really plays the moral ins and outs of it beautifully.
Yes. And of course, you mentioned Fremen there, and that's the word that I couldn't find earlier when I was talking about the blue eyes. Eyes of the Fremen people. Absolutely.
Chen Chang, like I don't remember seeing him much before. I like Dean Stockwell. Obviously, he's a terrific American actor. But yeah, I don't remember too much with Chen Chang in, although I think I have seen films that he's been in. I just don't remember them. Dave Bautista, I don't think it was given enough to do in the film, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I look forward to seeing more of him in the sequel. And obviously,
well, let's
Sting.
Let's talk about that then. So you asked me about how I found that. I actually, for me, I'm not gonna lie. When it puts up, when it comes to an end and it puts up, directed by Denis Villeneuve, I was like, oh, were we there already? So that 2.5 hours or 2.5 hours plus whatever it was, actually flew by for me. I was really invested in the characters.
This is interesting because I found that for me the film was about 20 minutes too long. So I feel that where it should have ended, for the sake of a cliffhanger for film audiences, is as the Ornithopter flies into the sandstorm and the Harkonnens launch their missiles.
Yeah.
I think we should have cut there.
Well, I mean, this was the issue, you see, because I think I can see what you're saying narratively. If it was absolutely guaranteed to have a sequel at that point, a cliffhanger would obviously be dramatically fun to end on. But
I've got to be honest with you. I don't think there's any way they were never going to do the second part. Unless this flopped so hard, there was no freaking way they were never going to give him the second part. And I bet that it was part of his contract that they had to give him the second part.
Yeah, well, I mean,
because he's not an idiot.
Right. Well, I mean, his intention with this is actually to be a trilogy, because what he wants to do is he always intended of doing the second part of this book and this story, but he also, I believe, wants to adapt Dune Messiah, which is the follow-up novel as well. And I think his plan, from what I understand from interviews, etc., that I've read of his, was to do that all along. But I don't think the studio were going to guarantee that, and I think that's something, part of the reason of why we got somewhat of a soft ending to this was just because, okay, I know it only tells half the story, but if it had imagine if it had ended in a cliffhanger and we didn't get the second part, how infuriating that would be for audiences, But again, who knows what's really going on? All I know is this film had to do well in its opening, bearing in mind that it, as you've already pointed out, it was being released both theatrically and on demand in certain territories. It had to do, because it's so expensive to produce, it had to do a certain amount before they agreed to actually greenlight production of part 2, which fortunately the plan is that in 2022 they're going to start filming part 2 for a 2023 release is the latest that we as we're recording this that we've got in there, and I'm delighted that we're going to get more of this.
Yeah, me too.
Because I do really rate Denis Villeneuve as a filmmaker. I've enjoyed all of his films. Blade Runner 2049 didn't do as well as was expected to do, even though it was a critical success. It was not the commercial success that the studios wanted it to be.
Which is a nice sense of synchronicity, yeah.
Yeah.
For Blade Runner.
Indeed. But no, absolutely. But that's I think why they had to see whether this was going to perform before greenlighting another massively expensive production. And but Villeneuve's plan was always this was, well, it says part 1 in the title anyway, not on the marketing materials, notably, but
I suspect that
it does.
that might have been a late decision, but
yeah,
I don't know. But yeah, certainly I'm looking forward to part 2. And I'm certainly looking forward to revisiting this film on Home Media when it comes out. Keith, so if people want to know about Home Media,
is this your cue that you want us to wrap up? Yeah.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm just taking a chance to segue nicely into a plug for your very good channel, which deals with Blu-ray and DVD technical aspects, really, and the quality or lack thereof of special features on Home Media. You do a lot of like 4K mostly, right? Don't you now? Like you're kind of well into the.
Well, it's a funny old marketplace. I mean, I call it the reason I named it Home Media Minefield was for a reason, because it is a minefield. There are various releases depending on where you buy stuff. Studios have a tendency to double dip, which is expected as well because it's a money making thing. But if you want to be a completist and you want to have all the versions in the best quality with all the special features and the best audio and all of this, it does turn into to somewhat of a minefield.
I will say that the one thing that drives me mad about the home entertainment sort of arena is having to buy multiple versions to get every special feature. Like that drives me absolutely up the wall.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand the reasons for it in terms of things like rights lapse and especially if you're dealing with filmmakers that have passed away and stuff like that. And
there's a lot of things that happen, and obviously like Arrow Video, and by the way I'm not sponsored by them in any way, but Arrow Video who have done the 4K release of 1984's Dune. It does come in nicely packaged. I have got an unboxing video on the channel if people want to see what's included. It comes with posters and booklets and bits and pieces, art cards, things of that nature. But the whole the marketplace is a funny one, because you've got 4K. That's still nowhere near as popular as Blu-ray. Okay, Blu-ray is kind of the high def de facto, and again, arguably, sometimes the difference between Blu-ray and 4K is negligible. Okay,
right.
But the other thing is, some titles are still only being released on DVD. Would you believe? So,
I know that is something I really don't get. That baffles me. In 21st century, 2021, like there are a couple of things from like 2020 that only came out DVD, and I was just like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, in the US, in terms of physical media, DVD still has the majority share of the market.
Crazy.
It's well over 50% of the marketplace is still DVD. And interestingly, like even titles which stream in 4K still sometimes only get released either on Blu-ray or on DVD. I recently got hold of it's a slight segue here, but Clarice, which is a spin-off of the Silence of the Lambs franchise, and that on physical media is currently only available on DVD. You can't get that even on Blu-ray. So go figure. But anyway, so thank you for the plug and apologies for the segue.
No, not at all. It's great. Thank you for doing this.
Villeneuve's Dune, I would say, would probably almost certainly warrant a 4K release.
I'd imagine there's going to be several releases, right, of this.
Yeah.
Steel books and whatnot.
Packaging is a whole nother thing. Steel books.
So, I mean, I don't really have anything to add to this now. I've kind of, I think over the two shows, I've said everything I want to say about it, and I'm really grateful for the chance to do that. And thank you for having me on and agreeing to kind of host part 2, Keith.
Well, that's all right. No, I mean, it is a, like the world of Dune itself, it's very complex and rich, and there is much that we can talk about the franchise and the adaptations. Bottom line is, I definitely fall in the camp that really enjoyed the Villeneuve film, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of this. And you know, getting into the world of Dune, which is something that, to be honest, you know, I've not been particularly familiar with the material, so I'm enjoying getting into it now. You know,
me too.
Cool. So Paul, you gave me an opportunity to plug myself on my own channel, if you like. I mean, obviously, if people are here watching this, please check out some of the other work and consider subscribing and all of that stuff. But Paul, what about your channel and your work?
So, as I'm sure people know by now, we are the Comic Crush. I am the Comic Crush. And we do, there's a website with articles and comics reviews and loads of great stuff, and a web store as well, which helps keep everything else financially going. All over at thecomiccrush.com. In terms of YouTube, we're on here with the Comic Crush channel, and I have a bunch of shows. So at the moment, there's Crushing Comics, which is weekly comics reviews with myself and Liz Jordan. From Panels to Pictures has a variety of co-hosts, including this fine gentleman here, who pops on every now and then. We also do specials like the Dune show, of which this is part 2. We do shows with a wonderful lady named Nikki Hrax, who is an artist and musician and comics fan from the US, and she comes on and talks about comics films. She loves Zack Snyder's stuff, so she's always game for talking about that. And in fact, we have got, as I keep saying, we've got the Army of Thieves show hopefully coming soon. There are comic creator interviews relatively regularly, so you can pop on and take a lot of those. That's a show called Script and Pencils. There's about 3 or 4 different shows. We do after shows. We've got the Hawkeye after show coming up towards the end of November, and that'll be running right through Christmas. I actually figured out last night, a couple of weeks ago, that we'll be doing shows right up until the 29th of December, and I'm really I'm really distressed because
no, it can be a nightmare, can't it?
Usually by then I like to have wrapped it up by mid-December for about a month, and then we come back sort of in January. But we will be taking a break, but there'll be whole new shows coming. So I've pitched a few new shows, and I'm plotting out the schedules for those now. Loads of stuff. But thank you, Keith. Cheers.
No worries. I mean, this is the thing about this world. And it's a good thing, but there is never-ending content coming. Whether
it's too much,
between films, TV shows, home media releases, and comics, that it's kind of fruitful, isn't it? So
it is. Can I do one particular plug? If you like movies and stuff, I've just started reviewing film books over on the Comic Crush. Hopefully, soundtracks will be next. But we'll be getting it more into kind of the niche areas of movies and movie geekdom as well. And I'm sure Keith is going to be part of that. I really want him to come on and do more. I really love doing these shows with you, Keith. It's always a pleasure.
I love talking about this stuff. I mean, there are so many movies and shows that I want to talk about, and just because of time, don't always get round to doing. So, I mean, the fact I'm delighted that we've had the opportunity to talk about Dune, because I really did. This really is something special to see on the big screen, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So,
and look, Keith, bang on an hour nearly.
There you go. We are there, aren't we? So, please check out our channels. Please subscribe. If you've got any comments to make, put them down in the comment section below, and we will answer those and respond to those. And please share with your friends, find us on social media, all of that good stuff. But for now, I've been Keith, and this has been Paul, and thank you for joining us, and we will see you at the next Home Media Minefield Panels to Pictures collaboration.
Yes, looking forward to it. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.